Hello, I'm Michael Howe with Gluware. In today's demo, we're going to be highlighting a pretty exciting use case here, which really shows the power of Gluware. Really not from a basic level demo. This is getting into maybe Gluware level 300. It's actually getting quite involved. And this demo is designed to showcase Gluware's power of automating CLI, API, both at the network layer and at the management layer. So let's jump into it. This use case is based on real-world deployments that Gluware is doing for customers today. It is not the exact same configuration or implementation, but it has pieces of those real-world implementations brought together to showcase a demonstration so you can see it and see how it could apply into your environment. So in this demonstration, we're going to be looking at a multi-vendor demo, automating security policy, including Cisco TrustSec, as well as the setup of this demo is that the network infrastructure has been changed. So someone made a change and removed security policy, and Gluware is going to be performing an audit and seeing where it's potentially not in policy and performing a remediation. So just to walk you through all the steps of it, because again, we're going to be highlighting, the demo is built to highlight many different characteristics and features of Gluware. Gluware sits at a layer we call the automation orchestration layer. We speak southbound to the network infrastructure. In this demo, we're working with Cisco switches using Gluware's native ability to speak to vendor OSs, in this case, Cisco iOS. We're going to be also speaking to the Arista switches using our native stack. That's Arista EOS via CLI. And we'll be automating Cisco Meraki via API. So that's on the southbound side. So in the first phase of the demo, we're going to be integrating one additional component, which is integration with the northbound side, which is really kind of considered the management and monitoring layer. And two components in this demo include ServiceNow. ServiceNow is going to be functioning as a CMDB, a config management database, or a source of truth. It's actually going to be kind of considered a source of truth for inventory information. So in the first step of the orchestrated demo, you're going to see Gluware performing an update to network properties, in this case description, and then performing a CMDB sync. So you'll see how we synchronize with ServiceNow to ensure that source of truth stays whole. Then, as Gluware performs an audit of the underlying infrastructure, we will determine that it needs to be remediated. So to make that change, we're going to again interface with ServiceNow, and now we're going to be interfacing it with it as an ITSM, an IT Service Manager. So we're going to be opening up a change request. That change request will have to wait for an approval to happen within ServiceNow. Once we get the approval, we will proceed on with the remediation. So in the remediation, we will be restoring the network to have the proper security policy. This involves registering the network devices with the Cisco Identity Services Engine. We will also provision policy, or the correct policy for the security protocols on the Cisco, the Arista, and we'll be changing a port level property on Cisco Meraki. So that's kind of a setup of the demo. Hopefully seeing and explaining it makes a little sense. As we jump into the UI of Gluware, you will understand all these pieces that are in motion. So let's go ahead and jump into the Gluware UI. So for this demo, you're going to be seeing 4 tabs open on my UI, my browser window here. That's because all of the components essentially are visible through a web browser UI. So in the first tab here, I'll be working with my Gluware instance. Just as a setup, I'm going to run you through the current state. So if I go into ServiceNow, if I navigate into my network gear, which is my inventory, you can see that this is the current source of truth of my network inventory. And as I make changes in Gluware and synchronize it, you're going to be seeing things are pulled in from ServiceNow, and we also push things into ServiceNow. We're going to be pushing a description change. You'll see that. The other piece of ServiceNow is if I navigate into change requests, currently there's no change requests open. But as we open a change request, you'll see that we'll have to go and approve it and move forward with the use case here. Next, let's navigate to the next tab, which is the Cisco Identity Services Engine. So as we navigate here into network devices, we're going to see no network devices are currently registered with Cisco being the Identity Services Engine. So you'll see the network devices registered. If we have time or get into a little bit more depth, we're in the Cisco devices, we're turning on the SPX protocol. Those will be here as well. So as we get to that step in the orchestrated workflow, you'll see those things happen. And for the last tab here, let's take a look at Meraki. In this case, I have a series of switches. I'm going to be automating a change on a switch. So if I navigate into that switch, I'll just show you the before state is if I look at the access policy, it's currently open. And we'll be performing an automated change to change the access policy on a Meraki switch. So that's the setup of the, let's say, current state. And let's jump into Gluware. Okay, so here we are at the Gluware dashboard, and I've signed in here. A couple quick points. One is I've signed into my Gluware instance. It is an on-prem instance. We can run on-prem or in the cloud. We provide role-based access control. So I'm signed in with my user with my role-based access control. Gluware is multi-tenant. So if I click on the down arrow, I see all the orgs. We call them organizations, but these are essentially tenant networks that Gluware has the ability to automate. So I'm on this particular demo network. In the dashboards, just to highlight dashboards real quickly, if I go to my dashboard library, you can build out any dashboard that you want very quickly. You can create a new dashboard, and it's drag and drop widgets. These widgets surface information for you graphically about the status of the devices, the network, the automated apps, your licensing, really anything that you want to surface from the underlying apps, you can bring up here to the dashboard level. So to drive this demo, everything is going to be happening through our Network RPA application. That's our process automation application. But as we fire off or get the process running, we're going to dive deeper into several of the, not all, but several of the applications as you see it move along here. So let's go into Network RPA and navigate into our workflow library. So in Network RPA, you have kind of two primary views. You have your workflow library and then your workflow activity. So in normal environments, you're going to have a lot of workflows that are built. This one is, again, pretty specifically to this demo and this demo environment that I've set up. But I'm going to go into a workflow that is built called the Network Auto Remediation. One thing I want to quickly point out about Gluware workflows as you build them in Network RPA, if I click on this workflow and I say View Info, whenever you build a workflow in Gluware, we automatically build an API endpoint and have the ability to execute this workflow via third-party integration. So this is how we could integrate with monitoring or logging systems like Cisco's Thousand Eyes or with Splunk. Let's say we have other demos out there where, with a Splunk alert, we can trigger a workflow. That would happen by incorporating this API call to run this workflow with the option of passing in input parameters if you needed to pass in parameters from that third-party integration. So I did just want to point that out. One other thing while I'm here is in the information section also, we automatically build a business process model notation integration. So you can export the BPMN. One of the goals with the process automation is to auto-document it. So you have the documentation of the process, as well as you can integrate annotations and comments as well. So with that introduction, let's jump into what this workflow is able to do. So I'm going to edit the workflow. So just to give you a little orientation to Network RPA, you can see here, I have a workflow built that has a bunch of tasks, and you can see the process here. So I can zoom in, zoom out of that. The goal of Network RPA is to provide a no-code experience to build process automation. And with process automation, we are automating Gluware application capabilities, and we're also automating third-party capabilities. So this is where the orchestration comes into play. So on the left-hand side, you've seen this a little bit already, but here's where I can navigate into the different purpose-built apps for Device Manager, Config Drift and Audit, OS Manager, Config Modeling. So we're going to get into these applications. But what I want to highlight in Network RPA is that on the right-hand side here, these network applications or automation applications have kind of been deconstructed into the task level. So I have device manager task, config drift task, audit, and on and on. As we get towards the bottom here, you're going to see task sets for third-party integrations. We've built a service connector, a Gluware service connector for ServiceNow. So there's going to be a number of tasks that we're doing here around creating, waiting for approvals on ServiceNow. We have integration with Meraki. You're going to be seeing that. We have integration with Cisco's TrustSec. So these are some of the example packages that have been loaded that provide the third-party integration. So with that description, all you really need to do when you're building with Gluware is you drag and drop those tasks into your canvas here and build out your workflow. So let's take a quick look at what we're doing here in the workflow. I'll just run through this really quickly and then we'll fire it off so we can move on to see this thing in action. So first, we're setting workflow context. This happens to be a workflow that we're managing variables throughout the workflow. So this enables us to essentially cache variables automatically for you along the way. Now we're selecting targets. Selecting targets are what are the devices that I'm going to be automating. You're going to see that this happens to be an interactive task in this case. We wanted to intermix tasks that weren't interactive as well as that were interactive that require user activity or prompting. So we'll see that. Next, we hit our first conditional. And so basically we have two paths, one for the CLI-based devices and one for the API-based devices. So this path will be for the Cisco iOS and Arista EOS. This path will be for Meraki. Next is we're executing a capture config. This executes what we call a snapshot with Gluware. So this will capture the current running configuration and any additional custom capture commands you have. We're going to dive into that a little bit deeper. Next is we're updating a device property. Gluware is a database. We essentially are a source of truth of your network inventory. So with that, because we're going to be applying zero trust enabled capabilities on devices, we're going to update the description on those devices to say that. Here's where the CMDB comes in that with ServiceNow is that now that we've made a change to our database, we want to sync that change with ServiceNow. So this task will simply perform a sync operation where we will pull in any changes from ServiceNow, push any changes from Gluware up to the ServiceNow CMDB. So you will see that. Next is we're executing an audit. And I just want to highlight that this is kind of the power of Gluware's automation in that you just drag and drop in a task to run an audit, and then you have audits built in your config drift and audit app, and all you're doing is selecting the audit that you're going to run. So you don't have to build the audit here in Network RPA. The audit is built. We're just going to run that audit. Now we have another conditional. This conditional is looking at the status of that audit. So essentially every task has input parameters and output parameters. And the output parameters of an audit give us the ability to determine if there were violations of that audit or not. So basically, if there were violations, we're going to go down this path. Otherwise, we will go down an alternate path here. We have set it up so we know in this case we will be failing the audit. So we are going to execute several ServiceNow ITSM tasks in this next sequence. First, we're going to be creating that change request. So we're going to open that up and we're going to seed some initial information in there saying that there's been an audit failure on my network access control, my security policy. We then have the ability to update that task. So that change request, we're basically going to be saying it's critical and high. And then we are going to wrap the next task in a wait for operator. So we're saying get that change request status, and the wait for operator is saying, I'm waiting for it to be approved. So I'm going to check every 1 minute up to 30 minutes. Again, if within your organization you have to wait longer, you can configure it however you need to. But we're going to be checking for that change request approval to go to the approved state. Once we go into the approved state, we're going to be assigning our config policy. We're going to be associating that config policy with our devices, and we're going to be executing the config change, meaning push down the policy. This is all happening within the config model editor, and we'll dive into that. Just to show some robustness, we often get the question, what if you have problems in your automation? What if there are failures? Well, Gluware has the ability to address failures with a try-catch. So basically, you take an action and you wrap it in a try-catch. So here's my try, here's my catch, and I'm able to push success down one path and errors, a task error or target error, into other paths. So right now, I just have those set up with notification that failures occurred, but I can take other actions as well. So then I'm going to be updating my change request. Now I have my path for Meraki, be syncing the Meraki automation, and again, performing similar things with Meraki, updating if I have to. We're going to push that policy to update the policy on that switch, and then I clear out my cache. So this is basically the workflow that I'm running. And again, this is fairly involved, but this is the power of Gluware. And once you've built an automated routine like this, it's highly usable and can be set up to be triggered. You can run it automatically. There's a lot of ways to invoke a process automation. So with that intro being said, we're going to go ahead and execute the workflow. Now, once I'm running it, I'm going to go to activity, and I'm going to switch over to kind of what is the running state of my workflow. So I can see here, it is sitting in a block state because I've hit my first interactive task. It happens to be the only interactive task, but I'm going to select my devices. So in this case, I'm going to just select them all, pass them in, and hit save. And now I'm off and running. So while it's running, I can change to the info view, the target view, or the task view. And I can see here I'm opening my targets. I'm filtering my targets. So this is going to be filtering them down to the 9 devices that I'm using in this. And I'm currently capturing the configuration. So while this is running, we're going to navigate over into the apps to dive a bit more into each app functionality. So first stop is Device Manager. So here in Device Manager, to give you the very quick overview, you have the ability to discover your networks or essentially run a scan, either be a seeded node or IP address scan, discover the devices in your network, and then we do a deep dive into those by running what we call a discovery. So if I double click on any one of these devices, you're going to see a lot more detail in what we do. I will say here, most users put the information they want to see right in the grid. Maybe they want to see the OS version, serial number, SKU, uptime, anything like that they can see here, and that it's fully configurable what they put in the grid. What I want to quickly note here is we did hit the task that updated the device description. So I can see that that happened here. Zero Trust Enabled that has happened here. So since that's happened, we'll take a quick pause. We'll navigate over to my ServiceNow, and we'll navigate into my network gear, because I do want to show you here now, because we've updated the information on the Gluware side, we hit the CMDB sync task. That sync has occurred, and if you remember, before there was no description, the description I've added for my Cisco and Arista devices now have updated descriptions because the CMDB sync has occurred. So now that we're proceeding on with performing an audit, once that audit runs, it fails, then it's going to be executing, and we will see that we're going to need to open up a ticket. In fact, since I don't want the workflow to be hung up, let's go ahead and navigate to change request and see, yes. So my change request has opened in ServiceNow. I'm going to go into the ServiceNow change request and approve it because my workflow is waiting on that approval. So here I see the change request. This is the description we pushed in. Again, we changed it from a low to a high priority. So I basically just navigate down here to the approvers list, and I can right click and say approve. This is going to change the status on this to approved. Therefore, as Gluware, within 1 minute, we will check again for that approval and move on. But let's jump back into Gluware Device Manager and quickly kind of move forward with our description. What I wanted to say is that, as Gluware is executing a discovery, we're running in Cisco IOS, for example, we run about a dozen commands, and we're ingesting that information into our database. So we're running show-ver, show-hard, show inventory, show boot, like all of the things that we're looking at to collect on that device and ingest it. So if I scroll down here, I can see my, vendor, hostname, OS versions, SKU, elements. We even are collecting port level detail. If it's part of a stack, the component level detail, you can generate out hardware reports and on and on. So not only do we do a pretty significant level of discovery, it's also customizable in terms of you can add additional things we capture. We'll get into that. So just scanning across this really quickly, I can see that I have an audit summary on a device level. We integrate with Cisco Support API and NIST. So here I can see if there's any end-of-life, end-of-sale information about this device, which there's not. I can navigate into the advisory summaries. So this is important if you have devices with advisories that you may have to address through iOS upgrades or config changes. This gives you that level of visibility. I can check out my SmartNet level coverage. In this case, it's a lab device, so it's not covered by SmartNet, but these are things that you want to understand if you're maintaining a Cisco inventory and you're paying for SmartNet on these devices. When I look at my snapshot, the snapshot is capturing the configuration as well as any additional commands that I have covered, and we'll get into that. The last two quick views here, you have the ability to execute backup and restores with Gluware. This is like configuration level. So you can have auto backups, scheduled backups. So I can see the backups were run here, but not run in quite a while. And then finally, you have a device level logging. So Device Manager is one of the frequent areas operational users of Gluware are using. But in the interest of time, let's move on into config, drift, and audit. And you're going to see a similar view here on the bottom. We maintain a UI component called Device Explorer, but some of the fields are different in the grid. So what I'll point out to you is the captured status, and we have a visual indicator if drift has occurred. So I can double click because I'm navigated into drift and audit, and I can see the drift level view. So I can see there's 26 line items here being highlighted. So if I move forward in this view, I'm given a side-by-side comparing what was determined to be my default config or my, let's say, golden or what was a good state to my timestamp right now. And I can see, the AAA was removed. If I move forward here, not only AAA at the group level, but tied to .1x was removed. My device tracking policy was removed. If I move down here, Cisco TrustSec was removed. My .1x configuration was removed, and even getting down into the CTS enforcement and down into the switch level. If I click next again here, I see a bunch of config statements that get applied under the interface when we're turning on 802.1x for port level authentication. So there's a lot missing from this config, which would be very concerning, but the good news is we are already auto remediating this problem. So let's just go on to the next step here of looking at audit. So I can navigate from here. I can navigate from here into my audit policies, or even click right down here. So let's take a look at my audit policies, and the audit we're using in this demo we call Global Health Check. So again, this is not a comprehensive audit, But what we want to show you is as I navigate in, I can see the last time this was run, which is just recently here as we automated, there were a number of violations. So we were looking at AAA and here's what was expected, here's what was missing. So we can see exactly what is potentially missing from a violation. Now, these audit rules, if I navigate into the audit policy itself, are very easy to build. And this particular example audit has rules for iOS, Arista EOS, Meraki, and combined config and state audits. So if we just double click into Arista EOS for .802.1x, the rule simply looks like this. In this case, these are global level commands. The configuration must include these 802.1x level configurations. If I even just scroll through my rules right here, I can see this is the AAA required configuration. So if I'm building these, I just name them. I have parameters that I can configure, and then I can drop in the required commands with regex, and our engine will assess the snapshot of the captured configuration and determine if there are any violations or not. The one additional thing I want to jump into just quickly is how do we combine configuration audits with operational state audits? So you can see here I have two operational state audits. So I'm looking at my CTS environment data. So if I look at this audit rule, the command is show CTS environment data, and I'm looking for this output that my current state is complete and my last status is successful. So the way Gluware is capturing this is if I just quickly show you in my org under discovery and capture, we have the ability for users to extend what is captured each time we run a snapshot. So again, this is just a demo environment, so there's only a couple in here. But if I click on this particular capture, we're running a show CTS environment data capture. So every time we run a discovery or a snapshot, which our automated procedure is doing, we're collecting this information. We can drift or audit it. Currently, we're not drifting. We are looking at the audit of this information here. So with that, let me just navigate quickly into config model editor, because one of the things that we're talking about is reinstating good configuration policy. So let's take a quick look first at my EOS switches, and I'll navigate into one of the switches here. So on the top level view, I have my devices. I've clicked into one of those devices. And what I'm looking at here on the bottom is a visualization of the Gluware config modeling. I like to explain config modeling as modular templating. Most people understand what templating is. You're defining set configuration. Usually you template an entire device configuration. Well, in the case of Gluware, we're actually able to look at feature by feature. There's a bunch of reasons we do this, but one of the best reasons is it enables users to kind of crawl, walk, run into configuration management, automating with Gluware. In this example, we've decided not to automate the entire config. We're automating security policy. So if I look at this switch here, if I double click on it and I look at my information, if I look at my association, we have something called an assembly. The assembly is like, if you think of Lego bricks as make up my configuration, it's saying what Lego bricks do I want to use to automate. So if I click on the assembly itself here, so you can see here, I am automating a feature called Glue.1x that's made up of multiple security components, including radius, interface level 802.1x, AAA, and more. One additional thing I'll quickly point out is Gluware has the ability to look at switch port level, because one of the complications of this config is components of the configuration have to be put on the interface level. Well, we don't want to just put this on every interface. Some are trunks, some are access. So how is that controlled? Well, we've defined something called a switch port filter, which enables, in this case, we're looking at the description. And if the description says no CTS, Cisco TrustSec, which is, again, the authentication policies, we are not going to apply. So we're going to apply this configuration unless it has no CTS in the description. Just diving a little bit further, I'm not going to do a deep dive into config modeling, but ultimately in config modeling, you are able to bring your own design, your own config. Everyone implements these protocols slightly differently. So we're configuring radius. If I click at the next one, here's when I said a modular template, if you look at this, it looks a lot like a template because this is a template for my 802.1x at the interface level. So we do have a template here, but it's an intelligent template that's determining the ports that we're doing based on the switch port filter. And then next is I have my AAA commands at the global level. So you can see here, again, not to get too deeply into config modeling in this video, but we want to just highlight that Gluware has the intelligence and the capability to automate very complex config components like security protocols and protocol suite. So let's take a quick look here at my iOS switches, for example, too, since we're automating that as well. And with the iOS switches, we have a very similar construct called the Glu.1x, which are all the Cisco-related configuration for the same thing as what we're doing on the Arista. So this is my radius configuration, my AAA, all of those things. I'm using that same switch port filter because, again, I'm looking at that CTS config. And I have my 802.1x, my radius, and even down to the port level configuration. So this, again, looks very similar, but this is the Cisco version of applying 802.1x on a port. So it's all managed by Gluware. So at this point, the remediation has already occurred. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into showing you the power and intelligence of Gluware. So I'm going to look at this device, and I'm going to look at the provisioning log, which is run successfully, called Demo Global Remediation. And I'm going to double click into this log. In this log, our users will appreciate that it's over 6,000 lines telling me what happened in this provisioning. So because Gluware is not running on top of something else, we're not pushing something down to Ansible and don't have any visibility of it, we're using our native stack to automate changes. So what you're going to see here, and I'll just scan through it to give you the highlights, but we're executing a capture of current state. So again, we're looking at show version, we're looking at the data here we may need to render specific configuration. We have examples where you may use different syntax of config based on the version that is running on the devices. So again, we are always running that collection, and then we get into the protocols being configured. Gluware's provisioning engine for configuration management captures the current state of these protocols. So we're looking at AAA, we're looking at radius, we're looking at the AAA group, the .1x group. So we capture the current state on the devices. Then we are comparing it to the desired state that's defined here in your policy. Then at runtime, we render the commands necessary. So to see the commands that were rendered, I'm going to switch to the CLI mode, and I'm going to switch to the processed view because the raw view basically gives you everything Gluware automated on the command line. So this is super helpful if you're bumping into any vendor issues or vendor bugs, be it Gluware or the manufacturer. You know exactly what happened, very transparent. Gluware can turn a fix very quickly. If you have a manufacturer bug like your vendor, you can work with them to get those things resolved as well. But clicking on the processed view, of all the things we're automating, so the SXP protocol, the .1x, you can see for .1x, these are all the things that were rendered at runtime that were missing when we compared the current state of this device to the desired state. All of these things were rendered and configured at runtime. So that's how we're able to put a device back in a good config state, no matter what state it's in. Maybe configuration was added, removed. We will remove what is out of policy, add what is in policy, and ensure the devices are at a good state. So that's, again, a fairly quick highlight, but I wanted to dive into a little bit of the depth of the config modeling state and protocol. The last app I want to highlight very quickly before getting back to Network RPA is I'm going to navigate back over, I'm going to navigate into the Topology app. Just to highlight real quick, as oftentimes where we get asked, do we visualize the network and things like that? And I'm going to switch this drawing to hierarchical and hit apply. Again, this is a lab network, so most things are kind of like just sitting out there, not connected. But because we have our Cisco's configured like a data center with spine leaf, I can put it in hierarchical and view that. So this type of view is very common for our customers that want to generate site documentation. So you can fully customize this, including adding to your labels. So let's say I want my, my type here on my device. I want the OS version, the host name, and the OS. And then on my connection, let's say I want my MACs and my IPs, and hit save. All of that is overlaid on your diagram, and you can generate you can generate this out to a PDF or a Visio and be off and running in terms of having site documentation. Again, this is a lab network, so it's probably not the best example of what a production network looks like. Let's jump back to Network RPA and go to my workflow activity, and let's look at the status here in the conclusion of my auto remediation workflow. So the workflow completed in under 9 minutes. I can dive into a lower level log, or the log here that has kind of all the information that, the details you may want to look at. But I think one of the most interesting views is when you click on your workflow and you navigate into the task level view, I can scroll down and see, okay, I selected my targets, I captured the configuration, I updated those device details, I sync with ServiceNow, I ran my audit, I created that change request, I updated it, I waited for approval, I assigned my NAC domain, and in terms of the ICE engine, we'll take a quick look at those two things when we're done here. And then I had notification. And so you can just look right through here and see everything ran through completion, and it is fully automated and back in good state. Let's navigate to the Cisco ISE engine and look at my network devices. I can see both the Cisco and Arista devices have been added here. If I scroll over here, both these are the Cisco devices. These are my Arista devices. Although it's profile name Cisco, these are actually Arista devices. If I navigate to the view of my SBX devices, again, just the Cisco devices are running the SBX protocol to propagate policy as part of the ICE capability. And in the last part of this, let's navigate over to this view here. Let me refresh my Meraki browser view here. And I'm going to navigate back into that switch port. And I can see, remember, it was open. Now I have my demo 01 policy. So I've enforced a policy on my Meraki access port as well. So that concludes the demonstration. Hopefully you can see, kind of get a glimpse of the power Gluware has across the automation suite, everything being tied together by Network RPA and the ability to orchestrate CLI and multi-vendor on the southbound side with Cisco Arista, Cisco Meraki, and on the northbound side, integrating things with ServiceNow and Cisco's Identity Services Engine. Thanks for your time and attention.